The call came at exactly 9:17 on a Friday night, and I remember every sound that filled the air in that moment because it was the sound that told me my entire life had just shifted. I had just stepped out of a rideshare holding a bag of groceries, thinking about nothing more serious than whether I had enough milk for the weekend. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket, the number unfamiliar but local, and against my usual instinct to let unknown calls ring out, I answered. The voice on the other end was firm but calm. "Miss Thompson, this is Officer Ramirez with the County Police Department. Your sister is in custody. There has been an attempt on your life." I froze in the middle of the dimly lit parking lot, my groceries slipping from my hands, apples rolling across the asphalt, the bag tearing open like the moment itself was mocking my naivety. I whispered back, my voice catching, "What did you just say?" Ramirez repeated slower this time, as if I were hard of hearing. "Your sister Hannah Thompson is in custody. We have reason to believe she orchestrated an attempt against you earlier this evening. We need you to come down to the station immediately." My entire body went cold. For a few seconds, I could not move. The night air pressed down on me like an ocean, and all I could hear was my heart pounding in my ears. In that exact instant, my mind pulled me backward, not to the grocery store, not to the quiet parking lot, but to the floor of my own living room, the memory rushing in like a flood. I could see it, feel it, smell it, even though it had only happened hours before. I was on the ground, the taste of copper sharp in my mouth, warm blood sliding down from my hairline into my eyes, the rug beneath me soaking darker with each second, the room spinning as the chandelier above me fractured into shards of light. Over me, I heard the panicked voice of Hannah, my older sister, crying out to our parents and to the emergency dispatcher she had on speaker. "Help! Please, my sister fell. She hit her head. She is not breathing right." Her words cracked with the perfect balance of fear and urgency, her tone designed like a rehearsed script. Every syllable meant to paint her as the desperate savior rather than the attacker. She knelt beside me, pressing tissues to my forehead with exaggerated care, whispering louder than necessary so the dispatcher could hear. "Stay with me, Claire. Stay with me." To anyone else, it might have sounded like genuine anguish, the portrait of a loving sister fighting for my life. But I saw it. Even half-conscious, I saw the truth. Her hands trembled not with shock, but with excitement, her eyes darting toward the corner of the room as if checking if anyone else was watching, and then in a split second, when she thought no one could see, her mouth twitched into the faintest smirk. It was the kind of smirk you see on stage actors when they hit their line just right. I knew then that it was no accident, no fall, no tragic misstep. It was a performance meant to crown her as the grieving sister while I bled out on the carpet. That was the moment I understood that the person who shared my childhood, the person I once believed would always protect me, had just tried to erase me. When the flashback snapped away and I found myself once more standing in the parking lot, the phone still pressed against my cheek, I realized my hands were trembling so hard I almost dropped it. I forced myself to breathe. Officer Ramirez asked if I was safe and if someone could drive me to the station. I whispered that I was fine, but inside I felt anything but. I was not fine. I was cracked open. My trust shattered in ways that words could not capture. On the ride over to the station, I kept replaying everything. The way Hannah had smiled earlier that day at our mother's kitchen table, her laughter easy, her voice dripping with false affection when she asked me to come by the house that evening for what she called a family dinner. The way she had poured me wine, urging me to relax, saying she wanted to make peace between us after weeks of tension. The way she had leaned close and said, "Let us start over," only to stand behind me just a second too long before the world went black. As the car turned down the main street, lights blurring through the rain on the windshield, I thought of the Thompson family as the neighbors always saw us. Linda, my mother, a respected member of the church circle, always perfectly dressed, her smile wide and rehearsed. Richard, my father, quiet and compliant, a man who rarely raised his voice. Hannah, the golden child, successful, admired the daughter who could do no wrong. And then me, Claire, the younger one, always in the shadow, always the one told to work harder, smile sweeter, give more, expect less. To the outside world, we were polished enviable. Inside those walls, however, we were poisoned, and that poison had finally reached the point of no return. When I walked into the precinct that night, escorted by an officer, the smell of disinfectant and coffee hit me. The fluorescent lights hummed above, indifferent to my world collapsing. I was guided down a hallway to a small interview room. My legs felt heavy each step, pulling me deeper into a reality I did not want to face. I sat down, and Ramirez slid a glass of water across the table. He looked at me carefully before speaking. Miss Thompson, I need you to be prepared for what you are about to hear. Your sister has been detained after evidence surfaced suggesting she attempted to cause you serious harm tonight. My breath hitched. I had known it deep inside, but to hear it confirmed by a uniform by the law was something different. It was not paranoia anymore. It was truth. In that moment, the tears finally came hot and unstoppable, not from pain alone, but from betrayal so profound it hollowed me out. I pressed my palms to my face, shaking. Ramirez gave me time, no pressure. Just silence, letting me absorb the weight of reality. When I lifted my head again, he asked gently, "Do you feel safe going home tonight?" I shook my head slowly, because the truth was clear. Home no longer existed. The place I thought of as home was a stage for violence dressed up as family, and Hannah had just torn off the final mask. The hook of my story is not just that my sister tried to take $5 million worth of insurance blood money by erasing me. It is that I survived the attempt, that I heard her fake screams for help while tasting my own blood, that I saw her smile while the dispatcher believed her tears, and that I am here to tell the truth. Because when betrayal wears the face of family, it is a cut deeper than any blade. And when the law finally says out loud what you have suspected in silence, it is not relief you feel. It is devastation wrapped in clarity. My name is Claire Thompson. I am 28 years old, and this is the night my sister tried to end me. 2 weeks before that night, before the sirens and the police station and the truth, no one could ignore the first fracture appeared, and it was not in the form of a bruise or a shove, but in numbers on a screen. I had logged into my bank account late one evening after work, planning only to pay off a small bill, when I noticed a charge I did not recognize. At first, I thought it was a clerical error, maybe a misclick while shopping online, but as I dug deeper, I realized something was shifting beneath my feet. My life insurance account had been tampered with. The policy plan my employer provided years earlier that I had barely looked at since now listed a single beneficiary. It was not my parents, not a trust, not a friend. It was Hannah, my older sister, my supposed protector, the one who had never hidden her disdain for me, yet somehow had found her way into the core of my financial future. The number attached to the policy was $5 million. $5 million. I stared at the screen, my breath shallow, my fingers cold, and for a moment I thought maybe I was mistaken. Maybe this was old information or an error in the system. But when I called the insurance company the next morning, the representative's calm voice confirmed what I already feared. Yes, the beneficiary had been updated 2 weeks prior. Yes, the paperwork bore a signature that resembled mine. Yes, the mailing address had been verified. My chest tightened as I realized I had never signed anything, never given permission, never even discussed the policy with anyone in my family. When I confronted my mother Linda that evening, sitting across from her at the dining table with the papers printed out and highlighted, she waved her hand as though I had brought up a trivial household chore. "Hannah probably just wanted to help you organize," she said, her tone soft but sharp, the kind of tone she used when she wanted to silence me without raising her voice. "She is always better with these things, and you know you are careless with paperwork." I gritted my teeth, the urge to shout building in my chest, but Linda's eyes dared me to speak louder. I knew the pattern too well. If I accused Hannah, I would be called paranoid. If I raised my voice, I would be told to calm down and stop being dramatic. So I swallowed my fury, but inside the fire grew. Over the next few days, Hannah herself began dropping comments that struck me like blades disguised as jokes. Sitting at the breakfast table one morning, she laughed and said, You know, Claire, if anything ever happened to you, at least your money would not go to waste. At a family lunch, she leaned in, her smile wide, her eyes locked on mine, and whispered, "Imagine what I could do with $5 million. Imagine the freedom." She laughed it off when I glared, telling the others she was teasing, but her gaze never wavered. It was not a joke. It was a message, and each time she said it, my stomach churned. My skin prickled because I could feel the line between banter and threat disappearing. I began to replay old conversations in my head, moments that once seemed meaningless now taking on darker tones. The time Hannah offered to drive me home after a party and joked about how dark the roads were. The time she stood at the top of the stairs and smirked when I slipped on the last step. The way she always seemed to be one step ahead when it came to our parents painting me as fragile, irresponsible, ungrateful while she shined as the golden child. It all clicked into place, the puzzle forming a picture I wished I could unsee. My own sister was setting the stage not just to ruin my reputation, not just to take my place in the family hierarchy, but to remove me completely. The pressure grew worse when I tried once more to speak with Linda. She did not look at me when I explained the insurance, the comments, the fear clawing at my chest. Instead, she stirred her tea, her eyes fixed on the swirling spoon, and said in a voice stripped of warmth, "Hannah has always had your best interest at heart. You need to stop making trouble, Claire. Trouble." That was what she called my plea for protection, my desperate attempt to be heard. I left the table, shaking tears stinging my eyes, the weight of being invisible pressing down harder than ever. That night, lying awake in bed, I stared at the ceiling and felt the shift inside me. Fear had always been my shadow, but now suspicion had joined it, and together they built a storm I could no longer ignore. I could not trust my sister. I could not trust my mother and my father. Richard was too beaten down by years of Linda's dominance to ever intervene. I was on my own. For the first time, I admitted to myself that Hannah's jokes were not jokes, that her control was not sibling rivalry, and that $5 million was enough motive to turn betrayal into a plan. The first clue had arrived not with screams or violence, but with a document typed in sterile black ink, cold numbers on a digital screen. Yet those numbers carried the weight of a death sentence. They told me that somewhere in the shadows of my own home, in the whispers at our own dinner table, my life was being priced and calculated, my existence reduced to a payout. And as the days passed with every mocking laugh and every dismissive shrug from Linda, I understood that if I did not start protecting myself, I would not survive long enough to tell this story. After the insurance discovery and the mocking comments Hannah sprinkled into every conversation, I realized silence would not save me. I had spent years swallowing anger, years being told by my mother that I was dramatic, fragile, difficult, and for a long time I believed it. But when money and my life became intertwined, when I heard Hannah joke about what she could buy once I was gone, I knew I had to take a different path. Fear no longer paralyzed me, it sharpened me. I decided that if Hannah was going to play a game, I would play it better. The first step was evidence. I needed more than suspicion, more than intuition. I needed proof that no one could ignore. A week after the insurance discovery, Hannah shoved me at the top of the staircase. It was subtle, the kind of push a sibling might disguise as a nudge, but my feet slipped and I tumbled down several steps. The pain shot up my ankle and my wrist slammed against the railing, leaving me with a swollen foot and bruises that lasted for days. Hannah gasped loudly, her performance flawless, and cried out for our mother. Linda rushed over, clucking her tongue, scolding me for being clumsy, while Hannah patted my shoulder and whispered, "You really should be more careful, Claire." I saw the flicker of amusement in her eyes as I winced in pain. That was the moment I understood this would escalate. If she was willing to test how close she could bring me to real injury without anyone questioning her, the next attempt would not be so restrained. So I prepared. I ordered a set of small cameras online, not the cheap ones easily spotted, but discreet models meant for discreet surveillance. I read every manual, watched tutorials, and practiced until I knew how to place them without leaving a trace. In the dead of night, when everyone else was asleep, I tiptoed through the house and fixed the cameras in corners of the living room, in the hallway near the stairs, even in my bedroom disguised behind books on my shelf. I angled one toward the safe in my closet, the safe Hannah had rattled so many times when she thought I was not home. Each blink of the red recording light felt like armor against the chaos. I was no longer defenseless. Days later, my suspicions turned to confirmation. I sat on my bed scrolling through footage when I saw Hannah enter my room. She looked around carefully, her movements slow, her face composed. She crouched by my closet and fiddled with the safe lock, her lips pressed tight in concentration. When it did not open, she stood and walked to the mirror, staring at her reflection. Then she whispered words that chilled me. "Soon this house is mine." She touched the glass as if admiring herself in a crown, then left the room. My hands shook as I paused the video and replayed it again and again, each time the venom of her whisper slicing deeper into me. The same evening, while using our shared family laptop, she forgot to sign out of her messages. I opened the account, not intending to snoop, but desperate to know if I was imagining things. The truth stared back at me in black and white. There were exchanges between Hannah and a contact saved under the name Mark. The messages were blunt and incriminating. "Once she is gone, we split the money." I read them over and over, my breath short, my chest tight. My heart hammered as I clicked through more messages, each one worse than the last. There were mentions of timelines of insurance payouts, of what they would do once I was out of the way. My photograph, a candid one taken at some family event, was attached to one thread with the caption, "She has no clue." I copied everything onto a flash drive, my fingers steady now despite the hurricane inside me. This was my lifeline. I could not trust my parents. I could not confront Hannah outright, but I could safeguard the truth. I took the drive to Daniel Carter, a lawyer I trusted from work, and explained as much as I could without collapsing. He listened carefully, asked no judgmental questions, and promised to store the drive securely in his office safe. If anything happened to me, he said this would be delivered directly to the authorities. His reassurance gave me a sliver of control. Still, every time I passed Hannah in the hallway, every time she smiled at me with that smug tilt of her head, my stomach clenched. I forced myself to act normal. I smiled back. I engaged in small talk. I even let her braid my hair one evening when our mother insisted we bond. Inside, though, I was watching, recording, memorizing. My fear had become strategy. I told myself that survival was no longer about running from her, but about staying one step ahead. Late at night, I would sit awake replaying the footage. Hannah laughing to herself in the kitchen while checking her phone. Hannah pacing in her room, whispering into her speakerphone, her words muffled but her intent unmistakable. Hannah pausing in the hallway outside my bedroom, her hand lingering on the doorknob for long seconds before moving on. Each clip was a stitch in the tapestry of her betrayal. Each file saved was another shield protecting me from being silenced. I knew something bigger was coming. The texts were too specific, the laughter too confident. She was waiting for her moment, and I was waiting too. Because when it came, I would be ready. The footage I had hidden away in my laptop grew heavier with every passing day, as though the files themselves carried the weight of truth too dangerous to speak aloud. One night, after reviewing hours of recordings, I caught something that pierced straight through me. Hannah had slipped into my room again this time with a flashlight tucked into the crook of her elbow, her face pale in the glow. She crouched in front of my closet and pulled at the handle of the safe with a persistence that made my stomach turn. She whispered to herself like someone rehearsing lines before a play. "Soon this house is mine." She said it twice, her voice steady, not even a hint of hesitation. When the safe would not yield, she rose and stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair back and tilting her chin as if imagining herself mistress of every corner of the house. The smirk spread across her face, soft at first, then curling into something vicious. I pressed pause and stared at her reflection frozen in time, that image burning into me like a brand. It was no longer suspicion, it was confirmation. I closed my laptop and sank into my bed, tears stinging the corners of my eyes, not because I was surprised, but because every part of me wished I had been wrong. Betrayal from strangers cuts one way, betrayal from blood carves you hollow. The memory of childhood came rushing back uninvited, pulling me to moments I had buried but never forgotten. I remembered Hannah at 10 years old, pushing me into the mud while our mother scolded me for ruining my dress. I remembered nights at the dinner table when she would steal food from my plate and Linda would laugh saying Hannah was only teasing. I remembered being slapped across the face at 13 after daring to shout back while Hannah smirked behind my mother's shoulder. Each memory a shard of glass lodged into my chest. What I had mistaken for rivalry was preparation. Hannah had always been building toward this. The night before the attack that nearly ended me, I overheard something that turned my veins to ice. I had gone downstairs late to fetch water when I heard voices drifting from the kitchen. I recognized Hannah's low tone and my mother's tired but complicit sighs. They were speaking about me. Hannah's voice was sharp. "She is weak, Mom. She will not survive on her own. She is always stumbling. It will not take much." Linda's response came after a pause, a sigh thick with resignation. "Do what you need to, just do not bring shame on this family." The glass nearly slipped from my hand. I pressed my back to the wall, my heart pounding so loud I feared they would hear it. I crept back upstairs each step, a weight dragging me closer to despair. My mother's words echoed again and again. "Do what you need to." I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every dismissal, every cruel laugh, every moment my mother had chosen Hannah over me. It was no longer about favoritism or jealousy. It was complicity. My mother's indifference had given Hannah permission, had given her the stage to turn me into nothing more than a pawn standing in the way of her imagined empire. When I saw Hannah the next morning, she greeted me with a bright smile, carrying a tray of breakfast into my room. She placed it on my desk and chirped, "I thought I would treat you today." Her voice was syrup too sweet, too heavy, masking the poison beneath. I forced myself to nod, my stomach churning at the sight of scrambled eggs and orange juice. She sat on the edge of my bed and talked idly about errands, about shopping, about how she wanted us to go to a spa together soon. Every word was an insult because I knew what she had whispered in the dark. She looked at me like prey she was fattening before the feast. That afternoon, I replayed the conversation on a loop in my head. Hannah telling our mother I was weak. Linda telling her to do what she needed. The footage of Hannah whispering into the mirror. The texts to Mark promising $5 million. All of it piled on top of me until I felt my chest might cave in. Yet somewhere inside the storm, a new steel was forming. I could not crumble. I would not hand her the victory of my silence. Later that evening, I confronted Hannah in the living room, my voice steady though my hands trembled at my sides. "Why did you change my insurance? Why are you sneaking into my room? Why are you whispering that the house is yours?" Her eyes widened only for a fraction of a second before she laughed, tossing her hair back like I had just accused her of stealing lipstick. "Claire, you are imagining things. You really should get help. You are paranoid." I stood taller and whispered back, "I already know." The words hung between us like smoke. For the first time, she faltered. Her smirk slipped, her lips tightened, her hands gripped the arm of the chair. Our father Richard had entered the room during the exchange. He stood in the doorway silent, his eyes flickering from me to Hannah, then lowering to the floor. He said nothing. His silence screamed louder than any words. I left the room with my pulse hammering, my body shaking, but inside, I carried a sliver of triumph. I had not screamed. I had not begged. I had simply told her I knew, and that knowledge was more dangerous to her than any threat I could make. That night, as I lay in bed, I understood clearly that the game had changed. She would strike soon, and I would be ready. The tension in the house became unbearable after that exchange in the living room. Every sound seemed sharper, every glance heavier, every word carrying layers of meaning that cut beneath the surface. Hannah moved around with a practiced grace, smiling at our parents, laughing at the television humming in the kitchen, but each time her eyes met mine, I saw the flicker of calculation behind them. She knew I had seen through her performance. She knew her mask had slipped, and that knowledge made her dangerous. I avoided being alone with her whenever possible, but avoidance was not enough. I needed to push to force her to reveal herself. The opportunity came one rainy afternoon when the others were out. The house was quiet, the windows streaked with water, the air heavy with the smell of damp earth. Hannah sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, her feet curled under her like a picture of comfort. I stood in the doorway, my heart hammering my throat tight, but my voice came out clear. "Why are you doing this to me?" Her head lifted slowly, her expression perfectly blank. Doing what she asked, her tone mild, almost amused. I stepped closer, my fists clenched at my sides. "You forged my signature. You changed my insurance. You have been sneaking into my room. You pushed me down the stairs. For what? For money. For the house. For control." Her lips curved into a smile that was more chilling than anger. "Claire, you sound insane. You need therapy. Everyone knows you are fragile. Even Mom says you invent problems to get attention." My chest burned, but I refused to back down. I said softly but firmly, "I already know." The words were simple, but they sliced through the air. Hannah's smile froze. For the first time, her composure cracked. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw tightened, her fingers gripped the phone so hard I thought it might shatter. She opened her mouth to retort, but no sound came. For a moment, we just stared at each other, two sisters standing on opposite ends of a battlefield that had no spectators. The sound of the front door opening broke the spell. Our father, Richard, walked in his coat, dripping rain, his face weary. He looked at us, his eyes lingering, then he sighed and moved past without saying a word. His silence was its own betrayal, a choice to hide behind weakness instead of confronting the truth. Hannah quickly rose and went upstairs. Her laughter forced her footsteps too fast. I stood rooted in place, shaking my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. But inside, beneath the terror, there was a thread of triumph. For a fleeting second, Hannah had been shaken. She had lost control, and she knew that I knew. That night, dinner was a performance of its own. Hannah chatted about work, about a friend's engagement, about nothing of importance, her voice bright, her smile wide. Linda nodded along occasionally, glancing at me with thinly veiled irritation as though I had done something shameful simply by breathing. Richard kept his eyes on his plate, chewing slowly, never looking up. I forced myself to eat every bite like stone in my mouth, every second stretching into an eternity. Hannah looked across the table at me once, her gaze steady, her smile subtle. It was not the smile of a sister. It was the smile of a predator who had decided patience was her weapon. After dinner, as I washed dishes alone, I heard her footsteps behind me. She leaned against the counter, her arms folded, her eyes sharp. "Do not think you can outsmart me, Claire," she whispered, her voice so low I almost thought I imagined it. I dried my hands, slowly refusing to turn. I said nothing. Silence was my shield. When I finally looked at her, my expression was calm. That unnerved her more than any accusation. She expected tears, fear, begging. Instead, she saw resolve. I went to bed that night with my pulse racing, my body tense, but my mind clear. I could not win by screaming. I could not win by begging for help from parents who had chosen their favorite long ago. The only way to win was to let her trap herself. I would wait, I would watch, and when she struck, I would make sure the world saw the truth. The days that followed were heavy with false peace. Hannah acted sweeter than ever, bringing me coffee in the morning, offering to drive me to work, suggesting we go shopping together. Each gesture was a knife wrapped in ribbon. I played along, smiling, thanking her, pretending to fall for the act while inside I counted the hours. The house felt like a theater, each of us rehearsing lines, each of us waiting for the curtain to rise. One evening, I caught her in the hallway, her face lit by the dim light of the lamp. She said softly, "Almost time." Then she walked away, leaving me frozen, my skin crawling, my breath shallow. Almost time. The words echoed like a countdown. But I was ready. My cameras were recording my flash drive secure with Daniel Carter, my instincts sharper than ever. She thought she was the director of this play. She had no idea I was already holding the script. The day Hannah decided to strike came disguised as kindness, as so many of her cruelties always had. She announced that she wanted to host a small family dinner, just the four of us together under one roof, a chance to heal old wounds and move forward. Her words dripped with sincerity, her tone soft and convincing, but her eyes never matched the warmth of her voice. I agreed because refusing would have marked me as suspicious, and because deep inside I knew this was the moment she had been preparing for. The cameras were already in place, the flash drive with Daniel was secure, and my neighbor Maria Lopez had agreed to keep her exterior security camera running after I confided in her that I feared something was coming. I was nervous, terrified even, but I was also ready. That evening, the house looked perfect, almost staged. Candles flickered on the dining table, the smell of roasted chicken filled the air, and soft music played in the background. Linda sat at the table sipping wine, smiling faintly, pretending everything was normal. Richard looked tense, his eyes darting between me and Hannah as though he sensed the undercurrents but lacked the courage to name them. Hannah floated through the room with the ease of a hostess, her laughter light, her hand brushing my shoulder as she refilled my glass. Every touch felt like a countdown, every laugh a warning. After dinner, she suggested I help her in the kitchen. I followed my stomach, twisting my pulse racing. The kitchen was bright with overhead lights, the counter spotless. She handed me a plate to dry, then stepped closer, too close. I turned and saw her hand tighten around the neck of a wine bottle. For a split second, her face hardened, her smile vanished, and her eyes gleamed with intent. Then, with a sudden motion, she swung. The bottle connected with the side of my head, a dull crack exploding through my skull, and I collapsed onto the tile floor. The world tilted my vision, blurring the taste of blood filling my mouth. Pain seared through me, sharp and overwhelming, but beneath it all was a terrifying clarity. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Hannah gasped theatrically, her voice rising in perfect panic. "Claire, are you okay? Claire, oh my God!" She knelt beside me, pressing a towel to my head, shouting for help. To anyone who heard, she was the devoted sister desperately trying to save me. But I saw the truth in the curl of her lips when she leaned close. "Stay down," she hissed so low only I could hear. "Stay down, and it will be over soon." My chest tightened with rage, with terror, with the realization that she thought she had finally won. But what Hannah did not know was that Maria's camera across the street captured the entire scene through the wide kitchen window, recording every second of her deliberate swing, every calculated move. And what Hannah did not know was that in the brief moment before the blow, I had managed to tap out a message on my phone hidden in my pocket, sending a single code word to Daniel Red. That was our signal, the one we had agreed on. Red meant the plan was in motion. Red meant he needed to alert the police immediately. As I lay there on the floor, barely conscious, I heard Hannah calling 911. Her voice breaking, tears forced into every syllable. "My sister fell. She hit her head. She is bleeding badly. Please hurry." She performed for the dispatcher with the same perfection she had always used to charm our parents and neighbors. Linda rushed into the room, gasping, clutching her chest, crying out at the sight of me on the ground. But instead of anger at Hannah, she glared at me as though I had once again embarrassed her, once again failed to hold myself upright. Richard stood frozen in the doorway, his face pale, his lips trembling, saying nothing, doing nothing. Through the fog of pain, I forced my fingers to tighten around my phone, to hold on to, survive long enough for the truth to arrive. Minutes later, the sound of sirens pierced the night. Hannah's act did not falter. She ran outside, waving frantically, guiding the paramedics and shouting that I had fallen, that she had tried to catch me, that she had done everything to help. But when the officers entered, when Officer Ramirez himself stepped into the kitchen and looked down at me, I saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes. He knew. My message had reached Daniel, and Daniel had reached them. I was lifted onto a stretcher, the lights bright above me, the voices loud, but through it all, I kept my gaze fixed on Hannah. She hovered nearby, wringing her hands, her expression a mask of fear and devotion. But when our eyes locked, I let the smallest smile slip across my face, a smile she did not expect. For the first time, she looked unsettled, her mask trembling, her certainty cracking, because she realized too late that the story she had tried to write was no longer hers to control. The trap had closed not around me, but around her. The paramedics rushed me to the hospital lights flashing against the night sky, but my focus never left the sound of voices echoing in the kitchen. Hannah's frantic wails, my mother's sharp gasps, the silence of my father who had long ago surrendered his spine. As the stretcher wheels clattered over the tiled floor of the emergency room, I clutched at consciousness with every ounce of strength I had left, knowing this was no longer just about survival. It was about truth. Hours later, bandaged and drowsy from pain medication, I opened my eyes to see Officer Ramirez standing at the foot of my bed, his notebook in one hand, his eyes steady. "Claire," he said gently, "I need to ask you a few questions, but I want you to know something first. Your neighbor, Maria Lopez, gave us her exterior footage. We saw what happened in that kitchen." His words sliced through the haze of exhaustion, flooding me with relief so fierce it almost hurt. I nodded slowly, tears burning at the corners of my eyes, and whispered, "Thank you." Back at the house, Hannah had been separated from the family and questioned. She played her role to perfection, her eyes wide with innocence, her voice trembling as she insisted it was an accident, that I had slipped, that she had panicked. But Maria's footage painted another picture. Clear as daylight, the video showed her standing behind me with the wine bottle raised, her expression cold, her movements deliberate. It showed her swing, it showed me fall, it showed her face flicker with satisfaction before the mask of panic slid into place. When Ramirez presented her with the footage, she faltered for the briefest second before regaining her performance, clutching her chest and insisting it was misunderstood, that it only looked intentional. But the officers were not fooled. Meanwhile, Daniel arrived at the station carrying the flash drive I had entrusted to him weeks before. He handed it over to Detective Morales Ramirez's colleague, who plugged it into the computer and began to scroll through the evidence. The texts between Hannah and Mark appeared on the screen, message after message, dripping with greed and calculation. "Once she is gone, we split the money. She will not fight back, she is too weak. Soon, we are rich." Each word a nail in the coffin of Hannah's innocence. The footage from the hidden cameras played next, showing her trying to open my safe, showing her whispering into the mirror, "Soon, this house is mine." The officers exchanged glances, their pens moving quickly over notepads, their expressions hardening. When Ramirez came back to see me later that night, he spoke plainly. "Claire, we have enough evidence to charge your sister. The footage, the texts, the witness statement from Maria, it all lines up." I lay there listening, my body aching, my mind swirling with disbelief. After years of being told I was imagining things, after years of swallowing humiliation and pain, the truth was finally undeniable. Yet even in that moment of vindication, a hollow ache filled me, because no amount of justice could erase the image of my sister raising that bottle with intent to end me. The next morning, I was stable enough to leave the hospital. Ramirez offered to drive me to the station to finalize my statement. As we pulled up, I saw Hannah through the window of the interview room. Her hair perfectly brushed her clothes. Neat, her hands folded on the table like a woman waiting for afternoon tea. But her eyes betrayed her. They darted from side to side, sharp and frantic, her lips pressed tight in a thin line. I was escorted past without entering yet. For a fleeting second, our eyes met through the glass. She stared at me as if I were a ghost she could not believe still walked the earth. I met her gaze with silence, letting the weight of my survival sink into her. Inside the station, Maria sat nervously in the waiting area, her hands clasped around her purse. When she saw me, she stood quickly, her voice soft but firm. "Claire." I had to show them. I could not let her get away with it. Tears filled my eyes as I hugged her, gratitude spilling out of me. Without her footage, Hannah's lies might have stood. Without her courage, I might have been erased twice, once physically, and once by the story Hannah tried to tell. In the interrogation room, Detective Morales pressed Hannah with questions. Why did she change the insurance documents? Why was she sneaking into my room? Why did she send messages about splitting money? Why did she swing the bottle with such force? Each time she denied, Twisted tried to deflect. At one point, she even attempted to blame Linda, claiming our mother had pressured her into handling family finances, that she was being framed, that she was the victim of a misunderstanding. But the evidence was too clear. Morales leaned forward, his tone calm but sharp. "Hannah, your neighbor saw everything, your sister recorded everything, and your own words sealed this case. You should consider telling the truth." Hannah sat back, her face pale, her breath uneven, but still she clung to her lies. When I finally gave my formal statement, every word trembled out of me, yet carried the strength of years of silence breaking apart. I told them about the insurance discovery, about the comments Hannah made about the staircase push, about the hidden cameras, about overhearing Linda's quiet consent. I laid it all bare, the toxic roots of a family that had rotted from the inside, and as I spoke, I saw the officers' expressions shift from sympathy to resolve. They knew they were not just handling a crime of opportunity, but a crime born of long-term cruelty and entitlement. That night, as Hannah was escorted from the station in handcuffs, I stood at the window and watched. She walked with her chin high, her eyes still trying to project control, but the clink of the cuffs around her wrists shattered the illusion. Linda cried out, rushing forward, begging the officers to stop, insisting her eldest daughter was innocent, that I had provoked everything. Richard stood behind her, silent as always, his shoulders slumped, his face a mask of shame. I did not move. I did not speak. I simply watched as the sister who once braided my hair, who once tucked me into bed when I was small, was led away for trying to erase me. The police had stepped in. The lies had cracked. The stage Hannah built so carefully had collapsed. And for the first time in years, I felt the stirrings of something like hope. The trial began 6 months later in a courthouse that smelled faintly of polish and paper, the kind of place where truth and lies are forced to stand side by side until one buckles under the weight of evidence. I walked through the heavy wooden doors with my lawyer Daniel at my side, the air thick with whispers and the click of cameras from local reporters. Hannah sat across the room at the defense table, her hair glossy, her outfit carefully chosen to portray innocence. Her hands folded neatly as if she were a schoolteacher instead of a woman accused of trying to erase her own sister for money. Beside her, Linda dabbed her eyes with a tissue, shooting me glances filled with both fury and desperation, as if begging me to retract everything, as if blood should excuse betrayal. Richard sat slumped in the back row, silent as always, his eyes refusing to meet mine. The prosecutor opened with a statement so sharp the room seemed to still. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not a case of accident or misfortune. This is a case of greed, premeditation, and betrayal within a family. The evidence will show that Hannah Thompson conspired to end the life of her own sister in order to claim a $5 million insurance policy. The words hung in the air, undeniable, searing. Over the days that followed, the prosecution laid out the pieces of the puzzle one by one. First came Maria Lopez, my neighbor, who testified with trembling hands but steady voice that she had seen Hannah strike me with the bottle through her security camera footage. The jury leaned forward as the video was played on the large screen, the image of Hannah lifting the bottle, swinging with precision the moment of impact, my collapse to the floor. Gasps rippled through the courtroom, the kind of sound that carries the weight of realization. Then came the text messages projected in black and white on the screen, Hannah's words to Mark, clear and damning. Once she is gone, we split the money. She is weak, she will not survive. The jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their faces hardening as the messages piled up. Next came the hidden camera footage showing Hannah in my room, tugging at the safe, whispering to herself in the mirror, "Soon, this house is mine." Each clip was another nail hammered into the coffin of her defense. The defense attorney tried to counter, claiming the footage was taken out of context, that the texts were jokes, that the bottle swing was clumsy panic rather than intent. He even attempted to cast suspicion on me, suggesting I had staged the evidence to frame my sister out of jealousy. But when cross-examination came, the prosecutor tore each flimsy excuse apart. He asked why Hannah was listed as the sole beneficiary of my policy, why my signature had been forged, why she had lied about being elsewhere when the incident occurred. Each question chipped away at the defense, until even the spectators could see the cracks spreading wide. When Hannah herself took the stand, she put on her best performance. Her voice wavered, her eyes filled with tears, her words painted me as unstable, prone to accidents, someone who had always resented her. She looked at the jury with practiced sorrow, claiming she had only ever wanted to help me, that the bottle had slipped, that she had never meant harm. But when the prosecutor leaned in and asked her why she told Mark by next week, "She will not be here," Hannah faltered, her lips parted, her eyes darted to the jury. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed, and for a moment silence filled the room, heavier than any scream. The verdict came after only 3 hours of deliberation. Guilty on charges of attempted murder insurance fraud and aggravated assault. The words echoed through the chamber as Hannah's face drained of color. Linda sobbed openly, clutching her daughter's arm, begging the judge for mercy, insisting Hannah was misunderstood. Richard sat motionless, his eyes closed, his head bowed. I sat in my seat, my heart pounding, my breath shallow, but inside me a storm of emotions raged. Relief, sorrow, vindication, grief, all tangled together into something indescribable. The sentencing followed weeks later. The judge, a stern woman with eyes like steel, looked at Hannah with measured gravity. "Miss Thompson," she said, "your actions were not only criminal but callous, rooted in greed and betrayal. You attempted to destroy your own sister for personal gain. This court sentences you to 25 years in state prison without the possibility of parole." The gavel slammed final and absolute. As Hannah was led away in cuffs, she turned her head toward me, her eyes blazing with something between rage and desperation. "You ruined me," she hissed under her breath, but I met her gaze without flinching. "No, I thought you ruined yourself." Walking out of the courthouse into the cool afternoon air, I felt the weight of years lift slightly from my chest. Reporters shouted questions, flashes exploded, microphones thrust forward, but their noise faded against the silence inside me. Justice had spoken. The sister who once braided my hair, who once whispered secrets under blankets, had been unmasked before the world, her greed laid bare, her cruelty punished. Yet even in victory there was no triumph. Only the cold knowledge that family had chosen greed over love, violence over kinship, betrayal over blood. The courtroom had given me justice, but it could never return what had been stolen. When the cell door clanged shut behind Hannah and the courtroom emptied, I thought the nightmare might finally loosen its grip, but I learned quickly that justice on paper does not dissolve the shadows that live in the mind. I returned to the house that night, stepping across the threshold with a strange mix of relief and dread. The air felt heavier, the walls colder, the very floorboards seemed to echo with memories I wanted to bury. The kitchen tile where I had bled looked scrubbed clean, yet my body still felt the impact, my ears still rang with Hannah's fake cries for help. The bedroom mirror reflected my face pale and bruised, but I could almost see her smirking reflection over my shoulder, whispering, "Soon this house is mine." Sleep eluded me in those first weeks. I would close my eyes and jolt awake at 3 in the morning, my body drenched in sweat, my heart hammering as if the bottle were about to fall again. Sometimes I heard Hannah's voice in my dreams, calling my name in a sing-song tone, pretending affection, promising that everything would be fine. I would wake with tears on my cheeks and the sick taste of fear on my tongue. At Daniel's urging, I began therapy. The first session, I sat stiffly on the couch, my arms folded, my eyes darting around the quiet office as if Hannah might burst through the door at any moment. The therapist, a calm woman named Dr. Miller, asked me to describe what had happened. My throat closed, my chest burned, and instead of words, I released a flood of sobs I had held in for years. She did not push, did not interrupt, just let me sit in the storm until my breathing steadied. Slowly, week by week, I began to pour out the story. I told her about the insurance discovery, about the push on the stairs, about the cruel comments disguised as jokes about my mother's silence, about my father's cowardice. I told her about the bottle, the blood, the performance, the trial. I told her about the loneliness that comes from being betrayed by those who share your blood. Each word felt like ripping off a bandage, raw and painful, yet strangely healing. The therapy did not erase the scars, but it gave them names. Trauma, gaslighting, family abuse, survival. Words that explained why my hands trembled when someone raised their voice, why my stomach twisted when I saw a wine bottle, why I hesitated to answer unknown phone calls. Naming the wounds gave me power over them. Still, the nights were the hardest. I would sit on the porch, staring into the darkness, hearing echoes of Linda telling Hannah, "Do what you need to." Hearing Hannah whisper almost time in the hallway, hearing Richard's silence louder than thunder. I tried music, I tried meditation, I tried prayer, but nothing silenced the chorus of betrayal. Only time and repetition began to soften the edges. Support groups became another lifeline. I sat in a circle with strangers who carried their own stories of toxic families and hidden violence. As I listened to them speak, I saw pieces of myself reflected in their words. A woman described how her brother drained her bank account while convincing their parents she was unstable. Another man spoke of a father who looked away each time his mother raised her hand. Their pain mirrored mine, and in that reflection, I found comfort. When it was my turn to share, my voice shook, but I spoke anyway. My sister tried to take my life for money. My mother looked the other way. My father stayed silent. And I survived. Heads nodded around the circle, eyes filled with empathy, and for the first time in years, I felt less alone. As months passed, the physical wounds faded, the scar on my temple hidden by hair, the limp in my ankle barely noticeable. But the emotional bruises remained tender. Crowded places triggered panic. Sudden noises made me flinch, trusting anyone felt impossible. When acquaintances offered sympathy, I accepted politely, but inside I recoiled, convinced that affection was just another mask waiting to slip. Dating was out of the question. The thought of letting someone close enough to touch my hand without suspicion seemed impossible. Yet amid the struggle, strength slowly took root. I began volunteering with a local shelter for women escaping abusive families. I told parts of my story, never the gory details, but enough for them to know I understood. Their gratitude reminded me that pain could be repurposed into protection. I watched women walk into the shelter broken and leave weeks later with their heads higher, and in them I saw glimpses of myself. Helping them became another form of therapy, a way to rewrite the script Hannah tried to force on me. My relationship with my parents remained fractured. Linda visited once, her eyes sharp, her voice trembling with both anger and shame. She accused me of destroying the family, of betraying Hannah, of exaggerating. I stared at her in silence until she left, realizing finally that I could not force her to see truth she refused to face. Richard called occasionally, his voice heavy with regret, but regret without action was just another form of cowardice. I listened, but offered nothing more than polite answers, my heart numb to his apologies. Through therapy and reflection, I began to understand that healing was not a straight line. Some days I felt strong, hopeful, certain of my survival. Other days I felt broken, haunted, drowning in memories I wished I could erase. But each day I woke up was another day Hannah had not taken from me. Each day I breathed was another day I reclaimed. By the end of the year, I had moved into a new apartment across town, small but filled with light. On the first night, I sat cross-legged on the floor among unpacked boxes, sipping tea, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something close to peace. I knew therapy would continue. I knew the scars would never fully vanish, but I also knew this. I had survived not just the blow of a bottle, but the crushing weight of a family poisoned by favoritism and greed. Survival was not just breathing. It was choosing to keep living, to keep rebuilding, to keep believing that betrayal did not define me. A year after the verdict, I sat on the porch of my small apartment with a journal in my lap, the evening sun casting golden stripes across the pages, and for the first time, I felt like I could breathe without the weight of ghosts pressing on my chest. The air smelled of cut grass and faint smoke from a neighbor's barbecue. Ordinary scents of ordinary life, and yet they felt extraordinary because they belonged to me now, not to the stage Hannah had constructed, or the prison Linda had built with her silence. I opened the journal and let my pen move, pouring out words that were not meant for the court, not meant for therapists or lawyers, but for myself and anyone who might one day read my story and recognize their own reflection. Family should protect you. I wrote slowly, carefully, but sometimes family is the first to betray. The truth is that betrayal by strangers wounds, but betrayal by blood rewrites you. It takes the girl you were and tears her into fragments, forcing you to piece together a new self from the rubble. I thought about the last time I saw Hannah, her eyes blazing as the cuffs closed around her wrists, her voice hissing that I had ruined her. In the beginning, those words haunted me because part of me wondered if she was right. Had I ruined her? Had I destroyed the family? Had I invited this pain? But therapy and time taught me the truth. She had ruined herself long before the trial, long before the cameras, long before the bottle. Each choice she made was her own. Each act of cruelty stacked until the tower collapsed. All I did was survive and hold up the mirror. The prison walls belonged to her, not to me. I remembered the look on Linda's face when the judge read the sentence. It was not grief for me, not sorrow for years of neglect, but horror that the mask of perfection had shattered in front of the community she prized more than her children. I used to crave her love, used to twist myself into silence just to win a scrap of approval. But now I saw clearly that her love had always been conditional, a leash wrapped tightly around Hannah while leaving me out in the cold. Richard's silence echoed too, the silence of a father who could have been a shield but chose to fold into shadows. Their weakness and favoritism created the soil where Hannah's cruelty grew. Accepting that truth was painful, but freeing because it allowed me to stop waiting for them to change. They were who they were, and I no longer had to carry the burden of their failures. The pen scratched across the paper as I wrote about survival. Survival is not glamorous. It is not rising from ashes in a blaze of triumph. It is waking up each day when your chest aches with memories. It is cooking breakfast when your hands tremble. It is sitting in therapy and admitting you are broken but still willing to heal. It is telling your story not because you enjoy reliving it, but because silence is where abusers thrive. Survival is choosing yourself again and again. As the sky darkened, I closed the journal and leaned back, thinking about the women I had met at the shelter. Their faces came to me in flashes, their stories woven into my own. A woman whose sister stole her inheritance, another whose mother refused to protect her, another whose husband convinced everyone she was unstable. We were all fragments, but together we created a mosaic of resilience. Helping them had healed me in ways therapy alone could not. It reminded me that my story, as painful as it was, could become a beacon for someone else. I thought about the viewers who might one day hear this story, people across the country sitting in their living rooms, many of them older, many of them carrying their own private scars. To them, I wanted to say this: do not dismiss your instincts. If your gut screams but your heart whispers excuses, listen to the scream. Do not let family ties blind you to cruelty. Blood is not always love, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. Speak out or fight back. Silence will not save you. Smart resistance, patience, and courage will. The house where it all happened still stood, though I had not set foot there since Hannah's arrest. Sometimes I drove past, slowly watching the curtains flutter in the wind, imagining Linda still inside, clutching her illusions, imagining Richard still sitting in the same chair, eyes lowered. The house looked smaller now, stripped of its power, just bricks and wood and memories. It no longer owned me. The day I threw my old house key into the river, watching it sink beneath the current, was the day I felt truly free. Justice had been delivered in the courtroom, but closure came in quieter ways. It came in laughter at a shelter meeting when someone cracked a joke about bad coffee. It came in the first morning I woke and realized I had slept 8 hours straight without nightmares. It came in planting flowers on my balcony and watching them bloom under the summer sun beauty, where once there had been only scars. I know the past will always walk beside me. I know Hannah's smirk will sometimes flash in my dreams, that Linda's dismissal will sometimes echo in my ears, that Richard's silence will sometimes weigh on my chest. But those ghosts no longer control me. They are reminders, not rulers. I carry them as proof that I lived, that I endured, that I rebuilt. If you have ever felt trapped by toxic family ties, if you have ever been silenced by those who should have defended you, if you have ever wondered whether you were strong enough to break free, hear me now. You are not alone. Your pain is real. Your survival is possible. And justice, though sometimes slow, can and will come. Do not give up on yourself, because even in the darkest nights, there is always a morning waiting to rise. I closed my journal, stood from the porch, and stepped into the quiet of my apartment. The air was cool, the night still. For the first time, I did not feel watched, did not feel hunted, did not feel like prey. I felt like Claire Thompson, 28 years old, survivor, truth-teller woman who had walked through betrayal and come out standing. My sister was rotting in prison. My mother was trapped in her own lies. My father was lost in his silence. But I was free. and freedom after everything was worth more than $5 million could ever buy.